This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today. I'm Richard Nta in Nairobi. Here's what's ahead. Telecommunications shut down as Sudan awaits another address from the military leaders. And China says Afghanistan needs more support from the international community. Once again, welcome to The World Today. We begin with latest developments in Sudan. The country's military leader, Abdel Fattah el-Burhan, is due to hold a news conference. It comes a day after the military seized power there, arresting Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and other civilian leaders. Citizens have been protesting the move, calling it a coup, amid reports that all telecommunications have been cut. Meanwhile, the international community has called for urgent mediation. For more on this, let's bring in our guest from Addis. Let's talk to Nta Asamoah, the head of African Peace and Security Governance Program at the Institute for Security Studies. He joins us live via Zoom from Addis Ababa. Andy, welcome to The World Today. Thank you for joining us. Now, Sudan's military has dissolved the transitional government just 1 week before the civilian leaders were set to have more authority. Does this mark the end of transition to civilian rule? From your perspective, how do you see it?
Thank you very much for having me. From the intro, what it does means is that unless the coup is reversed, that will signify a collapse of all that they've worked for the last 2 years. As you know, they were supposed to have served for 21 months, and then the civilian leadership will serve for the remaining 18 months before elections. With the overthrow, the whole arrangement collapses, and the situation now is in the hands of the military. Even though they've promised to hold the elections in 2023, if what they've done is anything to go by overthrowing the transitional charter, there's really no provision for one to be assured that elections can happen as planned.
All right, important point that you've made there. Now, from what we are seeing in Sudan, Mali, Guinea, and even Chad, what is driving this appetite for military control?
A number of drivers. At the domestic level, we've seen a rise in number of protests. Citizens demanding improvements in their situations in their countries. Those are really push factors. At the continental level, the African landscape had a very strict, no-nonsense approach to dealing with coups. But if you look at the recent handling of the situation in Chad, we saw somewhat a leeway emerging around that. And subsequently, we've seen a number of coups happening on the continent. So we can blame that on both the push factors within countries, as well as, if you like, the lack of very strict and very tough response that the continent had been known for. There's been a lax in that sense. And so these are things that together seems to be driving a rise in the number of coups that we see on the continent so far.
All right, Andy, speaking of tough and quick response, the U.S. has announced cuts to financial aid to Sudan. How do you see this impacting Sudan, if at all?
That move was expected, and I think if the military did not expect a move or pressure from the international community, that would be a very bad misreading of the nature of the international community at this point in time. What we've seen from the US is the first step. We are most likely going to see that several Sudanese development partners or several partners of Sudan might also move in different ways to try and push the military to roll back the move they've made. I think what is clear is that the international community, from the region to the African Union to the UN, are all against any move towards military rule. And particularly in Sudan, where many actors have praised the achievements of the Sudanese people, this has been a very bad reading on the part of the military. So this is actually a very first step. More are yet to come. They should expect more pressure coming in.
All right, excellent points. Andy, the international community has definitely made their position very clear. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Andy Nta Asamoah, much appreciated. Moving along now, China says Afghanistan needs more support from the international community. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi spoke in Doha while meeting with Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, the acting deputy prime minister of the Taliban's interim government. It's the first high-level meeting between the two sides since the Taliban took over. Wang urged Afghanistan to further demonstrate openness and unity while saying China respects the country's sovereignty. He also says Afghanistan needs more international support to overcome its challenges. China says it's willing to offer more help to Afghanistan while also urging the U.S. and other Western powers to lift sanctions. Wang also said he hopes Kabul can make a clean break from and crack down on terrorist groups. Baradar says Afghanistan's situation is improving and promised the Taliban will recruit more people from all ethnic groups. He also says the group is willing to protect the rights of women and children, and it hopes for more international support. And he says the Taliban will never allow anyone to use Afghan territory to harm China. The China International Development Agency has held a press conference on the nation's international assistance in combating the COVID-19. China has provided assistance to more than 150 countries and international organizations over the past 2 years, as well as donating over 1 billion vaccines. Here's what the officials had to say.
At the end of April this year, we managed to urgently provide oxygen cylinders, oxygen generators, ventilators and other relief materials to Nepal, Afghanistan, Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar and Sri Lanka. Within a few days of coordination, we sent a team of medical experts to Laos and sent anti-epidemic supplies to Nepal.
We immediately provided more than 120 batches of testing reagents and ventilators, provided vaccine assistance to more than 50 African countries and the African Union, and sent a team of anti-epidemic medical experts to 17 African countries. Meanwhile, we implemented a debt relief to help African countries reduce their debt burden.
Last year, we provided a large number of nucleic acid testing reagents and testing equipment. We also sent 37 medical teams to 34 countries and organised nearly 1,000 technical guidance trainings. We provided $50 million in cash assistance to the WHO and another $50 million in aid to UN agencies and other relevant international organisations.
Elsewhere, the first playbook for the Beijing Winter Games, which outlines anti-COVID measures, has been published. The guidebook, which is jointly published by Beijing 2022 organizers, the International Olympic Committee, and the International Paralympic Committee, will offer separate versions for athletes and team officials. The playbook specifies a closed-loop management system that will be applied during Games participants' entire stay in China. The closed-loop system will also allow Games participants to enter China without going through a compulsory quarantine if they are fully vaccinated. Anyone not fully vaccinated will need to quarantine for 21 days upon arrival in Beijing. Other principles, including minimizing social interaction and the testing, tracing, and isolating of possible positive cases, are also outlined in the document. Thrones, statues, and masks are among the 26 pieces of art and cultural heritage that will be returned by France to Benin next month. The furniture and sculpture were taken from a royal treasury in southern Benin during France's colonial occupation of the West African country in the late 1800s. Ross Cullen reports.
In 2018, the French President Emmanuel Macron announced the restitution of the artworks to Benin. In December 2020, French MPs approved the move. They set a deadline of 12 months for the return of the objects to take place, but the French President wants that happening sooner, and we do believe that the return of the objects to the West African country is going to be taking place in the middle of November. Now, we are here at the Quai Branly Jacques Chirac Museum in central Paris, where it is this week Benin Culture Week, and all 26 of the objects which are going to be returned are on display. They have been here in the museums Africa collection. They include the doors from royal palaces, the thrones from royal palaces, tunics, carvings, and also these sculptures here, half man, half human, which represent the power and the importance of the monarchy.
We have never seen these works that our ancestors made before. How can you inspire others without these objects? Our grandparents were ingenious. They created beautiful works which are here and which we have never seen. But now people can come to see these objects in our museum. More visitors will come. More people will be inspired. A museum without works of art or visitors makes no sense.
As part of its colonial expansion across Africa in the late 19th century, France fought 2 wars against modern-day Benin, which was known at the time as the Kingdom of Dahomey. During the Second Franco-Dahomean War in 1892, the commander of French forces, General Alfred Dodds, confiscated the 26 items as the spoils of war. Now, the royal palaces at Abomey in southern Benin, which is where the French soldiers looted the items, are considered by UNESCO to be World Heritage Sites. The United Nations Cultural Agency says that the royal palaces are of great historical and cultural significance. However, there are museums such as the Louvre here in Paris, just across the other side of the French capital, and the British Museum in London, which have strongly opposed any law which would require them to send back their cultural artefacts to the countries of origin. However, critics of the West's colonial-era collections have welcomed this move of restitution by the French government. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
Well, that's it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back after this short break with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thanks for watching.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The latest developments in Sudan as protests continue after military dissolves unity transitional government. Mali expels ECOWAS special envoy on accusations of meddling in internal affairs. We look at what this means for the country. And Zimbabwe calls for removal of long-running international sanctions. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. In business, Nigeria plans to unify the exchange rates of the Naira and Greenback in all markets. And in sports, Nigeria's bobsleigh team looking to improve on their Pyeongchang performance. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Thank you for joining us for this hour. Let's begin with developments in Sudan. The country's military leader, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, is due to hold a news conference. It comes a day after the military seized power there, arresting Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and other civilian leaders. Citizens have been protesting the move, calling it a coup, amid reports that all telecommunications have been cut. Meanwhile, the international community has called for urgent mediation. For more, let's bring in Patrick Ayet live in Juba, South Sudan. Patrick Ayet, welcome to Africa Live. Thank you for taking time to join us here. Patrick, questions are still being asked about the whereabouts of the detained Sudanese Prime Minister and other civilian leaders as protests continue in Sudan. What is the latest over there? Patrick, over to you.
Yeah, there is still no word about whereabouts of the Prime Minister Hamdok and the other civilian leaders who have been detained. Perhaps the military is doing this to make sure that the protesters that are now on the streets of Khartoum do not know where they are detaining these leaders, in fear that in case it is known, then the protesters are likely to storm that area to demand for those who have been arrested to be released. So perhaps it's this fear that is making them not to disclose where exactly these people are being detained. And as you correctly said, protest is continuing in Khartoum. The internet remains shut. Also, telecommunication network has become very, very difficult today to connect to. Only one line was working before we came on air, and also the connectivity is really, really very, very poor. And many people are hoping that during the news conference that is coming, perhaps the military leadership will say something regarding those who are actually detained.
All right, Patrick, you have extensively covered interactions between Sudan and other countries. How is this shutdown of the Khartoum airport, the borders, and even telecommunication lines in Sudan likely to impact those in the country? Talk to us about that.
It's impacting negatively. Let me start with just here in South Sudan where I am, and we have relatives across. Many South Sudanese people have relatives in Sudan. They have colleagues in Sudan. They have friends in Sudan. To get to them is very, very difficult. Not only that, before this crisis erupted, there were some agreements between governments, like for example the government of South Sudan and Sudan, where they were supposed to open borders that were closed since 2012. The border could have actually been opened this month. It was just a matter of days for it to open. This opening is looking now unlikely. There is also the issue of oil. Both Sudan and South Sudan depend on oil, and the oil from South Sudan passes through Sudan to Port Sudan and then to the international market. Now with the current disruption of work in the Sudan, where the professionals are calling for all the unions, all professional unions not to work, meaning even the petroleum sector will suffer. Not only South Sudan will be affected, but also Sudan. And then, of course, internationally now, Sudan was getting on a very good standing, where, you know, countries that before were not friends to Sudan, countries that had sanctioned Sudan like the US had already removed some of the sanctions. Financial assistance was coming to Sudan. All this is now disrupted. Moreover, now there is no even international flight. You cannot land in Khartoum. So even for South Sudan, that has been really mediating peace processes between the various armed groups and the coalition government, which is now dissolved, have no access to the leadership in Sudan. So it is really, really impacting negatively on their relationship, and that is a worry for many, because former President Omar al-Bashir was overthrown because of difficult economic situations, among other factors, and it looks like with the poor relationship that may result out of this military takeover, a poor relationship will result into more serious economic problems for the country and more disturbances within the country. Not only that, even the armed groups. You have armed groups that have been operating in Sudan, and some of them find safe havens in the bushes of South Sudan. The same to armed groups that are operating in South Sudan, they find safe havens in Sudan. These kind of things are likely to return, and there are refugees, there are Sudanese across in South Sudan, in Uganda, and so forth. So, and there are Sudanese also across. So whenever there is this bad relationship, then the citizens are the ones who will actually really suffer a lot due to lack of connectivity and so many other problems that would result.
Okay, Patrick, yeah, thank you so much for staying on top of that story for us. We appreciate your insight and analysis as well. Moving on, let's turn our attention to Mali, where the country's transitional government has ordered an envoy of West African Regional Bloc ECOWAS to leave the country within 72 hours. Hamidou Boli is accused of actions, quote, incompatible with his status, close quote, and that's according to a foreign ministry statement. The statement said the government is still open to dialogue with ECOWAS, which has been pushing for the country to keep its commitment to hold elections next year following a military coup in 2020.
Diplomats have an obligation of constraint, have an obligation of impartiality, and must not interfere with the affairs of a country. Naturally, they must do their jobs representing the interests of the organizations. So when we got to that point today, the representative of the ECOWAS in question receiving several warnings. These warnings were addressed to the person in question, then to the Commission of ECOWAS. With ECOWAS, we wish to continue relations of good cooperation, relations of solidarity with the Conference of Heads of State, the various bodies of ECOWAS, and ECOWAS as an organization. We just ask ECOWAS to designate another person who is aware of the limits of his mandate and will be ready to work with this person to advance the agenda of our organization.
All right, let's turn our attention to Egypt now, where the country's President Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has announced the lifting of the state of emergency in the country, including that in the Sinai. The state of emergency has been in force since 2017. It has been extended continuously since then. The exceptional law gave the police the right to arrest and search private property without judicial warrants. All right, moving on, to CGTN's Adel Al-Marui joins us live from Cairo. Adel, thank you as always for joining us here on Africa Live. Adel, what has informed the lifting of this state of emergency now, and how are people reacting to the development over there? Adel.
This is a major achievement for Egypt. Since the foundation of the Arab Republic of Egypt in 1952, this has been the norm for Egyptian people to live under this state of emergency. First it was war, and then under President Mubarak it was for security reasons and terrorism, and that continued with the unrest in 2011 until today. The insurgency in North Sinai and the terrorism activities in that part has always made the North Sinai in particular a place where the emergency law is applied, even though sometimes it was not all over the country. But since a terrorist attack that targeted 2 churches in Egypt, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has imposed the emergency law all nationwide. So this is a major significant progress in Egypt's security challenges. It marks, as President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi said, a new chapter in the security level in Egypt. for people, as I told you, Egyptians in general have almost never lived without the emergency state of law. So basically this is a new, and how long will it last is what many are concerned with. Of course, because of terrorism primarily, the state of law has given the authorities, the security apparatus in Egypt, unprecedented authorities and rights so that they can curb any security event that can threaten the national security of the country before it takes place. And therefore, in general, it's a widely celebrated move. It's a significant step to show that Egypt is finally approaching a satisfactory level of security for the authorities and for the president to lift that state of emergency.
All right, Adel, let's leave it there for now. We certainly appreciate you keeping us up to date with what's going on over there. Much appreciated as well. Adel Marui, thank you so much. Let's turn our attention to Zimbabwe, where President Emerson Mnangagwa has renewed calls for the U.S. and other Western countries and organizations to lift sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe. He was speaking on Anti-Sanction Solidarity Day, adopted by the Southern African Development Community in 2019. Reports coming from Zimbabwe indicate that the restrictions imposed on the country have caused economic losses of more than $40 billion.
The sanctions are illegal, unjustifiable, and unfair. While the instigators of these sanctions claim that the measures are only targeted at a few individuals, the illegal sanctions have in fact sought to cut our economic lifelines and to tarnish Zimbabwe's image and credibility. They have crippled our health industry, agriculture, education, tourism, and infrastructure sectors by seriously undermining our ability to engage, trade, and conduct business. Sanctions remain a huge constraint for the country to realize its full potential. The continued imposition of hateful sanctions on our country does not only impact Zimbabwe, but curtails the role we must play within the SADC region, African Union, and indeed the United Nations family of nations.
Tunisia is mandating COVID-19 vaccine passes for Tunisians and foreign travelers. A presidential decree issued Friday said officials, employees, and visitors are required to show a card proving inoculation against the coronavirus. It is required to access public and private facilities as well. Adnan Shawashi reports.
The president of the COVID-19 vaccination campaign and head of Pasteur Institute in Tunis explained that vaccine pass will also be required to enter malls, cafes, restaurants, bars, hotels, and tourist resorts.
The vaccine is not compulsory. It's still free and not mandatory. People have misunderstood the decree. Yes, many citizens are vaccinated. They can resume a normal life and go anywhere, just like vaccinated tourists. However, the state will not impose the vaccine on those who refuse it, but they will not be allowed to enter any closed private or public facility without the pass. People have to take responsibility for their choices.
Hashmi Luzir added that there are some people who can't get a COVID-19 vaccine for medical reasons.
There are some exceptions and very rare cases of patients who suffer from diseases or allergies and could show side effects after vaccination. They are treated separately. They will be given the pass even without a COVID-19 vaccination. This is a very small portion of the population.
According to the scientific committee at the health department, Tunisia is split on vaccine passes.
I completed my vaccination, but I don't think it should be made mandatory. People have the right to refuse it, but their freedom of movement will be restricted.
I am diabetic. I'm forced to get vaccinated in order to travel abroad and live a normal life, but I'm not convinced about the safety and efficiency of vaccines. The authorities are pushing for more restrictions and imposing the vaccine pass in an indirect way.
The COVID-19 task force has announced that 37 patients are currently on life support in public and private hospitals, and 116 are in intensive care. Tunisia has recorded more than 25,100 deaths since the outbreak of the pandemic in the North African country in March 2020. Many Tunisians believe that the ease or freedom to work and engage in leisure activities will be limited by the health pass. The health department plans to launch a COVID-19 awareness campaign and to step up the vaccination operation in the next few days. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Somali Prime Minister Mohammed Hussein Roble says clan delegates need to be ready to start elections for the lower house of parliament. Elections of the upper house were completed in some states at the end of September. Roble was last week speaking to a clan delegate from the Somaliland region to set a deadline for the lower house elections in the region. Elections for the lower house were initially scheduled to take place from October the 1st to November the 25th. Voting, though, has yet to start because the upper house elections in some states have not been completed. Elections in Somalia follow a complex indirect model. State legislators and clan delegates pick lawmakers for the national parliament. Lawmakers, in turn, choose the president.
I want to order the Electoral Committee, the clan delegates and the candidates to join hands for a free and fair election.
We agreed during a meeting with the Somali president that we should come up with a work plan to speed up the Somaliland lower house elections. We agreed to start the elections within 2 weeks from now.
Restoration of China's seat in the United Nations was an epic diplomatic battle. A journey fraught with obstacles.
Yes!
Africa's support was crucial. Victory saw a new era in China-Africa ties, founded on a common future and shared prosperity.
China and African nations have supported one another in combating COVID-19, further enriching already existing relations and areas of cooperation. CGTN's Enoch Sokolia looks at how China has supported the continent in fighting the pandemic.
Despite challenges, Africa has intensified the fight against COVID-19, and Chinese vaccines are playing their part. Besides those donated by the Chinese government, African states are increasingly buying Sinovac and Sinopharm vaccines. Professor Joachim Osur, the Vice Chancellor of Amref International University in Kenya, says the Chinese vaccines have boosted mass inoculation in Africa.
Pandemics require that we act across borders, that we don't restrict our actions to our countries. That's the only way we will control the pandemic.
According to data published by Africa CDC, Chinese vaccines Sinopharm and Sinovac are among the most used vaccines across the continent. The data shows that Chinese vaccines are used in 42 African countries. Still, Africa is lagging behind in vaccinating its people, with less than a third of nations achieving a 10% vaccination target by September. But amid the struggle, China is helping the continent find long-term solutions. China is collaborating with nations to enable them produce COVID-19 vaccine locally. Among them is Egypt, which has been receiving vaccine raw material to produce the Sinovac vaccine. The North African country aims to be a regional hub for vaccine production and exportation.
The need to have a reliable supply of vaccines in Africa is very important, and that can only happen if we have a reliable source for producing the vaccines. And so the need to have production in Africa has been stressed again and again.
The first coronavirus case in Africa was reported in Egypt on the 14th of February 2020. And when the outbreak began to spread on the continent, Chinese President Xi Jinping assured Africa of China's support during the pandemic. China began by delivering anti-epidemic materials and sending medical teams to more than 18 African countries like Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal. This included personal protective equipment, face masks, thermometers, and ventilators.
When COVID started, I think one of the biggest problems we had was lack of PPEs. We could not get gloves, we could not get masks. It became a big problem. And most of the developed nations decided to hoard what they had and use them in their populations. Now in Africa, the only savior then became China. So that early phase of the epidemic, China played a great role.
As Africa and indeed the whole world continue to battle COVID-19, the relationship between Africa and the People's Republic of China has been deepening. And experts say it will only get better and better. Enoxi Kolia, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
It's been a milestone year for China. It became the first country to ever overcome extreme poverty, one of the biggest achievements of the ruling Communist Party over the last 100 years. China is also celebrating 50 years at the United Nations, where it's championed major issues such as climate change, global stability, and the millennial development goals against poverty. CGTN's Julie Shire takes a look at what this means for the African continent.
Dozens of workers are hard at work assembling fridges at the Hisense factory in Atlantis, Cape Town. Joan January, a mother of two, has worked here since finishing school in 2014.
My responsibility as team lead is basically to check for the quality and to have a good relationship with my employees on the line. So if your relationship with your employees is fine, then you're going to get good quality. You're going to get your total production total that you are needing for the day.
Technician engineer Xavier Jafta also worked himself up the ranks. With little skill, he joined the electronics and appliance maker soon after it opened its doors in 2013.
I was a normal operator. At first, we didn't produce any TVs. We opened the TVs from China and then we just put in the main board and then we closed the TVs again. That was just for the start so we can know a little bit knowledge of the TV. And after that, I worked myself hard to get where I am now.
Jafta now trains new employees across Africa. He will soon head off to Angola to set up a new TV production line.
I will run the lines, its repairs and the assembly and the quality and the efficiency on that. I didn't think it would happen to me, but yeah, I am here and I'm glad I'm here, and I would like to thank Hisense for the support and for what they have given me and see the quality in me to send me away and to make them proud and to run a factory on my own.
Close to $30 million has been invested in bringing this factory to life. Today, it's one of the most productive in the world outside China. It adds 800 jobs to this community where before investment was scarce.
Hisense is just one among many in different sectors of South African economy. And this kind of investment, it assists the local community on a number of areas. One is just poverty alleviation. Also, the knowledge that is really accrued, it's something that it feeds into our own technical colleges, our own universities. It goes beyond just that company and benefits going beyond our borders into the continent.
China remains Africa's biggest trade partner. Since alleviating poverty in its own country, it has pledged to continue working closely with developing nations to reduce inequality. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Various African leaders have hailed Chinese President Xi Jinping for his speech delivered during the 50th anniversary of the restoration of China's lawful seat in the United Nations. President Xi said all countries should jointly practice true multilateralism and jointly build a community with a shared future for mankind and a better world.
I think this is what we need to do collectively, ensure that we strengthen the multilateral system, fight against unilateralism and bullyism and narrow nationalism, but that we work towards a global community that is underpinned by the United Nations. This is an important moment for the multilateral system and the UN. And it should be recognized globally that China, firstly, the injustice that was done to China, keeping them out for over 21 years. And secondly, in the 50 years that China has become a responsible and valued member of the United Nations system, China has made tremendous contribution to the international community by its commitment to multilateralism and its commitment to strengthen the United Nations system as the center of the global governance architecture.
By vying to rejoin the United Nations, what the Chinese people or the Chinese government was saying was that we love peace and stability, because it's only when you have peace and stability that you can develop. I say so because the organizations that they were joining, the United Nations itself, is an organization that stands for peace and security. And by so doing, China was showing that they wanted to be part of the global village. And indeed, when they came to our aid, when we established our relationships over the Tazara, that was one of the proofs that China was indeed interested in becoming a global partner. And that's where our minds, your minds and the minds of our party meet, because our party is centered on the people. Poverty is very difficult. We are finding it a huge challenge in many countries to get rid of it. But I know through hard work and through other initiatives you managed. So we, going forward, we look at ways in which we can learn from you, we can engage more with you to see how we can, in our own way, reduce on poverty.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Nigeria has launched its first ever digital currency called the Naira. The African nation is one of only a few countries in the world to develop an official digital currency. This is coming months after it barred banks and financial institutions from facilitating transactions in cryptocurrencies. Our correspondent Philly Haza reports from Abuja, the nation's capital.
The unveiling of the Nigerian Central Bank digital currency known as the Naira took place at the State House on Monday with the president and top government officials in attendance. The Central Bank of Nigeria Governor Godwin Emefiele says a worth of $1.21 million in electronic version, which is the Naira, has already been minted by a Barbados-based technical partner, Bit Incorporated. The company was selected by the government from several others to develop the digital currency. Governor Emefiele says the Naira application can now be downloaded on Google Play Store and Apple Store. He says when compared to the physical legal tender or fiat, the Naira has lower charges because the account holder of the Naira wallet will not be charged for daily transfers between accounts. The regulatory body had earlier banned cryptocurrency trading in Nigeria in February, saying that it was largely unregulated and risky. But officials say with the use of Naira, the crypto trading can now be effectively monitored and regulated. The Apex Bank had earlier announced the launch of the digital currency on October 1, but postponed the launch due to activities for the country's independence, which falls on the same day. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Well, the Nigerian government has been working on unifying the exchange rates of the naira and the dollar at the official and parallel markets. It plans to do this by improving the foreign exchange inflows into the country. Let's take a look.
For many years now, the gap between the official and unofficial exchange rate between Nigeria's local currency, the naira, and the dollar has continued to widen. Now, the government says it plans to close that gap, improve the economy and the standard of living of Nigerians.
Our goal is simple. We will develop quality infrastructure that will bring prosperity to millions of Nigerians in both urban and rural areas.
Nigeria's naira exchanges at the central bank's official rate of 410 to a dollar, but at various bureau de change, also known as black or unofficial market, it trades as high as 570 to a dollar. It's the worst state of the naira since the country gained independence in 1960. The gap between the CBN rate and what is obtainable at the black market has worsened investor confidence. It has also caused inflation of goods and services as Nigeria's economy is largely import-driven.
So the government is actually looking at the fact that oil prices, oil price in the international market has actually gone up, and would like to cash in on that since we now have more dollar inflow into the country. That will help to shore up the gap between demand and supply that we're currently experiencing.
Crude oil, which is Nigeria's mainstay, is currently selling well at the international markets. It hit its highest price since 2018 at $85 per barrel early last week. But experts say beyond depending on proceeds from oil, the government needs to revamp other sectors like agriculture and prioritize tackling insecurity.
If we are able to boost confidence, reassure investors that they will be safe and their investments will be safe and that they'll be able to repatriate their assets when the time comes, then and only then can we be able to really achieve what we set out to achieve. Anything besides that, we'll continue to experience this gap.
President Buhari has now ordered the heads of security to intensify their offensive against criminals in various parts of the country.
While such efforts are ongoing to boost investor confidence and improve the other sectors of the economy, millions of citizens may have to hope for brighter days with the state of the naira, which the government aims to improve before the end of the year. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
The IMF is predicting that the pandemic has permanently lowered the path of real GDP into sub-Saharan Africa. The global financial body suggested a loss of real per capita output of close to 5.6% in the latest issue of the Sub-Saharan Africa Regional Economic Outlook report. The report highlighted that Africa's recovery path is different from the common road that much of the world is following. The divergence, which the IMF says will continue for some time, is linked to the region's lethargic vaccine rollout and disparate policies. The IMF says Africa's recovery from the pandemic remains highly vulnerable to changes in the global outlook, including a tightening of global financial conditions. And we're not done just yet. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Here's a peek at the headlines. In sports, Nigeria's bobsleigh team looking to improve on their Pyeongchang performance.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the